Hello, everyone. My name is William Johnson, and welcome to another edition of The Talk Show. I am chairman of the American Freedom Party, and my co-host is Barack Obama Mandela. We have an interesting show for you today. If you listened to our last show, we know that we were talking a little bit about the presidency and the upcoming election, and then we segued into the Back to Africa movement that is burgeoning now. So, Barack, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here and I'm ready to go for my black people.
Very good. Okay, so you mentioned in the last show that there is a movement now called the Back to Africa movement, of which you are a part. Well, I want to tell you that in the 1980s, the Self-Determination Committee and I signed a joint declaration, and it said basically as follows. The Self-Determination Committee, which is the Back to Africa Black Group, says, whereas since the 1950s, as an unincorporated entity, and since 1965 as a California nonprofit corporation, the Self-Determination, Reparations, Repatriation, and the United States Citizenship Committee of the United States of America has continuously fought for the freedom, liberation, self-determination, and compensation for blacks. Further, the Self-Determination Committee has concluded that African Americans are not immigrants to this country, but were brought here against their will by force and violence as slaves and chattel. Further, the Self-Determination Committee has concluded that as non-immigrants, these African Americans can never be released from the bondage that brought them to this country. The United States government, by imposing the Constitution on black men and thrusting upon him the facade of freedom and citizenship through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, perpetuates the slavery and captivity unto this day. And further, the Self-Determination Committee has concluded that the only way to finally end the slavery and injustice begun more than 3.5 centuries ago and perpetuated today is to provide for reparations, repatriation, and self-determination of African Americans. In this way, blacks can achieve the full measure of their potential and build a nation and societies of advanced levels, the likes of which the African continent has not yet seen. What's your thoughts on that, Barack?
Amen, amen, amen. I support that, and not only that, I support it in my personal life. My name happens to be Barack Obama Mandela. I'm named after Nelson Mandela and Barack Obama, who's the father of President Obama. So I have a strong African name. I'm an African man. I was born in the United States. I'm a citizen of the United States, but I do not call myself an American. I'm a black African who happens to be a citizen in the United States, and this is true for all black people. We were brought here as slaves, and we are slaves now. We're slaves to lightening our skin, getting nose jobs, straightening our hair to look like whites. We're slaves to police brutality, like Rodney King in the LA riots. We are slaves to discrimination. And look how the famous Michael Jackson lightened his skin, changed his nose, shrunk his lips, straightened his hair to look like a white man. So these are examples of the slavery of black Americans. So we need to return to Africa. And I have one more suggestion, because money is a big issue. And I don't believe black Americans have enough money. So I turn to Janet Yellen, who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And I say we need to release black currency in the United States. We can actually have dollar bills that are black in color for black people. And we can have Malcolm X. We can have his picture on the cover. And we can have black currency to allow black people to have power. Because without money, there is no black power.
Okay, you brought up some very interesting points, and I think that what you're talking about is not confined to just you and not just confined to me, but I've been reading in articles in the paper lately about the resurgence of the reparations, repatriation, and Back to Africa movement among a large segment of the black community. What's the word on the street? Is that gaining a foothold now in this country?
It is definitely gaining a foothold. I live in Los Angeles County, and recently I was approached by gang members from the Bloods and the Crips, two violent gangs in Los Angeles, and the Bloods and the Crips were talking about uniting in one force and returning to Africa. So that would be something positive for America, because Americans would like to see gang members leave. And these gang members, they want to go back because they feel that black people have failed miserably in the United States and that we are still slaves.
Well, I think the underlying and overarching issue here is that we have tried diversity, we've tried multiculturalism, we've tried integration, and things have just gotten worse. We have not overcome the race problem. The race problem has grown, exaggerated, and exacerbated our life in this country. And I think that we finally need to realize that even though it's not a pleasant word sometimes, there has to be a divorce. The blacks and the whites have to divorce.
And I think that one leader who speaks of this issue, and we need to mention him, and that's the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the head of the Nation of Islam. Farrakhan empowers blacks. So I'm willing to meet with Farrakhan and convince him to support the Back to Africa movement, because Farrakhan can help lead us as a people back to Africa.
Well, of course, I think that's true, and people within the white nationalist community have listened to some of the words of Farrakhan and Malcolm X very deeply. There's a lot that we disagree with, but there's a lot that we agree with. We can find a lot more agreement with the Farrakhans and the Back to Africa blacks and the separatist blacks than we can with the integrationist whites. And so, yes, I definitely think that the blacks should follow his lead and rally around that. But a bigger issue is, why do you think diversity has failed, integration has failed?
Well, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King had a famous "I Have a Dream" speech. I have a dream that blacks and whites will come together as sisters and brothers. Well, Dr. King's dream has become a racial nightmare for blacks, because what integration has done is it's created black people who want to be white. Black people want to go to white schools. Black people want to move to a white neighborhood. A white neighborhood is considered a good neighborhood. White hair is considered good hair. White skin is considered good skin. So black people now want to be whites, many of them. So what we need to do is we need to say, hey, we black people need to love ourselves and respect ourselves and not bow down to white supremacy. We must return to Africa, or we must create a black ethno state within America. I think we can take Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, parts of Texas, Tennessee, and we can put them together and call it Black State. And we can have all blacks live in a black ethno states, and white people can go out and live in the Northwest, out in Idaho.
Well, I certainly think that this is the beginning of a discussion that needs to be discussed further. But something you said earlier reminded me that, do you know who probably the most quoted black man in the white nationalist community? It's Cassius Clay. It's Muhammad Ali, because he has taken the position that you've said. He was talking about that in the 1960s. And so I've heard many quotes where he has said, you know, only a fool would want their children to look like someone other than yourself. You want your children, you want your grandchildren to look like you. And that, I think, is a perceptive comment. Well, these are issues that are very important, and we're going to have to discuss further. So we want to keep these discussions short. So, Barack, what do you have to say to wind up this discussion on Back to Africa or separate racial ethnic states?
Well, what do we need? We need black power, black power, black power.